Have you ever wondered how the Gi's home was subsumed by the planet? What are the Cetra really up to? Is the Edge of Creation and Loveless connected? And why did Jenova arrive on the planet in the first place? Is all of this a part of a long setup that was in the works for longer than some of us expected? Are you ready for next year's revelation, or are we still caught in the web of deception? In this video, I want to share my interpretation of the story, so spoilers for Remake and Rebirth ahead, and share my revelation, speculation, final mega theory based on various evidence, observations, and show you why I believe that there are no accidents in the Remake trilogy.
Are you here to see Loveless?
Everything is connected, because this is the 30-year cook. Let's start with where the Gi actually came from, because it underpins everything that is happening in FF7 Remake. And I think we have pretty solid evidence not only for what happened to their world, but that Gi Nattak didn't tell you the whole truth. So,
hearken unto me.
Our first clue is in the first thing we see in the trailer for Revelation, the reversed image of a mysterious astronomical object set up at the end of Remake, seen after we defeat the Harbinger of Fate and beat up Sephiroth. Sorry, did I say beat up? I meant at the end of Remake where Sephiroth let us win? Because so far all of this is going according to his plan. I mean, look at his smile. He's loving this.
My puppet.
Cloud gets transported to a place described by Sephiroth as the Edge of Creation. Furthermore, we see two images on opposite sides. One that kind of looks like a star that went supernova, a process at the end of a star's life where it explodes, consuming its solar system, and on the other side, a red nebula. In the material Ultimania, they are described as representing the universe of death and the universe of creation. We also know that there's 7 seconds till the end. What Sephiroth is later ruminating on is the nebula that looks like a supernova, a world that is ending. I think that's partially because of what's behind him. In real cosmology, the stars that turn supernova return their matter to the universe, and in time, new stars are born when giant masses of gas and recycled matter collapse and ignite. Based on what we see from Bugenhagen, the cosmos of FF7 has some similarities to ours. Gaia itself orbits a star, and there are other stars out there too. If we look around Cosmocanyon and listen to NPCs, we find that planetology is both a spiritual and physical study of the planet and the cosmos, with some scientific concepts at play, so I think it's fair game to consider these similarities seriously.
The lights we observe here have traveled to us from the far reaches of time and space.
Maybe it's not all dreams and rainbows. We'll get back to the Edge of Creation later, but I want you to note that in the Remake Materia Ultimania Plus, Toriyama describes it as the very brink of the planet's culmination, where even time itself seems to stand still, and that Sephiroth is standing on a barren rock, and there is no sky anymore. In Rebirth, we see another representation of the Edge of Creation at the end of Loveless, where the world ends and we can see clearly that the time has also stopped, represented by the broken clock, and the sky has shattered, revealing the cosmos. What's also interesting is that right before the world ends, we see a Cetra reuniting with her loved one, in what I think foreshadows the Promised Land that the Cetra we're talking about. Except this is the nature of the planet, so Alfred says,
You needn't promise that you'll wait, for I know that I will find you here.
Duh, we're all reuniting in the Promised Land right before the world ends. I will elaborate on this idea later, Rosa, I promise. You see, just like life on the planet goes through a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, I think the planet itself goes through a similar cycle. All life on the planet ends and perishes. Then it starts again. New planet, new lifestream. And this is why I think the Gi made a terrible mistake and are actually responsible for their own predicament. Because the star they called home began to wane.
Until at last it was subsumed by your own. The earth shook, seas boiled, skies shattered, and time stopped.
However, when the Gi's planet was ending, the Gi did not perish. They persisted.
Few of my people survived the chaos and calamity. Those who did began a new life here.
But what they found on the other side was not a new home.
But to the planet, we were not welcome. Not in life nor in death. Those not born of the life stream can never join its flow. One cannot return to that from which one did not arise.
After a long time, the new planet, born of what once was the Gi's homeworld, rejected the Gi because they were not bound to this new lifestream. They were aliens. Now, I do have to address what Gi Nattak is referring to when he says the star we called home began to wane. In the Japanese audio script, we see that star is translated from Hoshi, which can actually mean a planet or other heavenly body, or even a figurative star. Throughout Rebirth and OG, the same word is used when referring to the planet. For example, when Cloud says about Sephiroth that
He wants to save the planet.
in Japanese he's using the same word. So bear in mind that star and planet tend to be used interchangeably in English translations. And that I'm not proposing that the Gi's actual sun had to go supernova, but because FF7 borrows ideas and concepts from our own world, there's likely an equivalent process that can happen to the livestream itself, which is tied to the planet or star, or both. In general, star is just another name for the planet, but what if the planet and its star are also connected in some way through the livestream? Perhaps when everything that makes a planet and its lifestream comes to an end, it is returned to the universe so that it can be reborn as a new planet. So why do I think that the Gi made a terrible mistake? Because you do not accidentally survive an apocalypse.
But I will not end.
Think about it. Through some unnatural force, the Gi managed to survive their own edge of creation. Instead of accepting their fate when the world was ending, they chose denial. Their spirits were stuck until a natural process has subsumed parts of their homeworld. But when we visit them, there is no sign of remorse, only anger.
Undone by treachery!
Denied by the livestream, the Gi likely managed to turn a clear materia into a black one, and the Cetra stole this materia so it doesn't get used to destroy the planet. But were the Cetra innocent in all of this? After all, it's obvious to our party that such destructive magic should not be used.
Whatever that materia is, we can't let them have it. No matter how much they want it.
So, let us consider the Cetra. The Cetra are mysterious people. Throughout the story, we learn very little about them. They're stewards of the planet who managed to contain Jenova, but as for the kind of people they were, we only know what we've seen through Ifalna and Aerith. One of the biggest insights we get into their history in Remake is the VR presentation at the Shinra building, where we get a surprisingly big lore dump and learn of the meteor that led to their demise, and that the ancients seemed like peaceful hippies, spending their time running around, making materia, and probably eating vegan burgers or something. Sorry, did I say lore dump? I meant Shinra propaganda, because all of this is a bunch of lies. I didn't buy that the whole Neo-Midgar plan will ever pan out, but Remake cleverly exploited our assumptions about the Cetra only to subvert them in Rebirth. We start learning about the real Cetra as we make our way down through the gates protecting Cosmo Canyon from the Gi. Bugin explains to us that in the caves underneath Cosmo Canyon, the Cetra conversed with the Gi. Later in the Temple of the Ancients, we get an idea as to where things went wrong and why there were no vegan burgers in sight. The Cetra were angry people. To hype up their warriors, they would make them relive their worst traumas and memories.
Reflect on thy long and bloody path, and kindle life's fire anew. Forget not thine ire, for it shall remake thee.
Aerith acknowledges that this anger may be a source of strength, but it isn't worth it. We see one example of that in the Gi caves. The Cetra spoke with the Gi, but couldn't resolve their grievances. What may have begun as a conversation in good faith turned into a stalemate, with the Gi obsessed with ending their existence through destruction, and the Cetra fearful of the Gi. The Cetra chose the nuclear option and stole the black materia, likely using the conversation with the Gi as part of a ploy. By doing this though, the Cetra actually doomed themselves, because what's keeping the Gi confined are not just the different gates and walls, it's the Cetra who are still around.
Alas, it appears we have been discovered.
As long as the Gi are around, the Cetra have to be in charge of their prison, and anyone who tries to visit the Gi is actively removed. However, because the Cetra's influence is becoming weak, the Gi are increasingly able to escape. The walls of this prison are crumbling. With the Gi obsessed with destruction and the Cetra keeping them imprisoned, is there any way of ending this ancient stalemate? I think there might be. And the key to helping the Gi is someone who's a bit of an underdog. You know who I'm talking about, right?
Hey guys, it's me! Who?
Two legs? Nothing to it.
Come along, number 13. Don't be shy.
You wanna go?
Stop! This child's a friend.
I am that which you see before you, nothing more. I'd appreciate it if we simply left it at that. Agreed?
Nanaki, initially introduced as Red 13, is one of my favorite characters in OG. I love his story in the Cave of the Gi. In battle, he's a strong tank who makes a great addition to Cloud and one of his girlfriends. That said, I've always felt that he wasn't that key to the story as he could have been, almost feeling like an optional character at times. I mean, Yuffie gets a whole freaking continent, what the hell? In Rebirth, that hasn't really changed. He's still a bit of an underdog. We find out his true identity and the truth about his father. However, what Rebirth does set up is potentially a huge conclusion to the conflict between the Gi and the Cetra, with Nanaki being right in the middle. The Gi respected Seto, and in the Cosmo Canyon side quest, we see that they are willing to trust Nanaki as well.
And if we comply, you will keep your word.
It might take some time, but I'll do it.
Nanaki is a perfect candidate because his life is also full of trauma. He has a lot of blame he could point at Hojo and Shinra, yet he shows restraint and takes the high road.
No, I can't blame him for our actions.
Contrast this with the Gi, who don't accept any culpability for their situation and turn their anger towards the Cetra. Nanaki is a role model who understands that his actions have wider consequences. Now, the elephant in the room. The voice change.
Coming!
Look, I found it jarring too. Even though I knew back from OG that he is basically 16 in human years, without voice acting it was hard to tell exactly what that entailed. However, Nanaki indeed is and always was a child. I think the localization team in Rebirth didn't hold back on this one because that's also important to the story. The Gi had an eternity to consider their circumstances, yet the truly wise character here is a child that is able to overcome this great injustice done to him. Seeing him tortured by Hojo hits a little harder as well when you realize that he's just a kid. Barrett in a way serves as a surrogate for the audience with his
Hey guys, it's me! Who?
The reveal is supposed to shock you, that's the point. What I didn't like about his representation in Rebirth is how the mask gradually starts to slip, with even the music during his Queen's Blood match hinting at his true self. And how he ended up matching Yuffie's energy. All of this helps us to slowly understand who Nanaki really is. While these reveals may be uncomfortable at times, maybe this discomfort is purposeful. If you're still wondering why Nanaki was putting on his old wise man voice to begin with, ask yourself what was your reaction when you heard his real voice, and how brave of him it is to accept his true self. Next time you cringe when hearing his voice, remember that his embarrassment is probably equal to your level of cringe, and that's also what makes him such an inspiration, because we should all be following our goals and dreams regardless of how uncertain we may feel about ourselves. I used to hate my own voice, for example, but here I am yapping about FF7 to anyone interested. Thank you for listening, my friend. So, if you really think about it, Nanaki's deception makes a lot of sense. And let's be honest, everyone is lying in this game. Except for Sephiroth, who's weirdly very upfront about his plans, unless he's busy trolling Cloud. But in Sephiroth's defense, he's doing it to prove a point. Everyone else though...
I'm a 9-to-5 nobody at a small Shinra subsidiary.
Well, I'm sure they have good reasons for lying. Don't get me started with Bugenhagen. He lied to Nanaki about his dad, and he's the mastermind of the greatest alien cover-up since Roswell, New Mexico.
Wake up, people. The aliens live underground. Of Cosmo...
He's even admitted that he was the one to seal the caves.
Why, yes. And by my own hand, no less.
And every question he dismisses...
Like, making the spiritual energy stronger?
Why are you asking me such things?
All a misdirection from the devs, because each question is like a Chekhov's gun, waiting to fire an answer in Revelation. Nothing is an accident. Everything is a clue, and the story becomes a lot more intriguing if you start looking for these little misdirections.
The survey team has returned with reports of sightings of Gi spirits within the Veil.
But they were sealed within the cave.
Indeed they were. I can attest to that.
So how did they get out?
Well, these are spirits, Nanaki. Who knows what they can or cannot do?
Everyone around Bugenhagen is asking the right questions. He dismisses them as if they are not important, but thinking about them could point us at the answers to the biggest mysteries in the game. Because if Remake was designed to fool us, then what is Rebirth hiding in plain sight? So how could this help the Gi? One of the many things that the Remake trilogy is greatly expanding is how the livestream actually works, and what its rules are. What if Nattak, by his example of not following the path of vengeance and self-deception, could convince the Gi that they should abandon their quest for destruction, and convince the Cetra that they should not fear the Gi, but accept them instead? This could be a path to the Gi's salvation that doesn't involve the destruction of the planet. The game shows us that the livestream has a collective mood that is driven by the souls and memories within it. Perhaps if the livestream is more tolerant, it could allow the Gi to become one with its flow and allow them to bind to Gaia, since those not bound to her can never join its flow. I think the livestream has been essentially following what the Cetra have been doing, which is keeping the Gi at bay. The symbolism of this separation is abundant in the game, the village being separated by a river of Mako, the strong contrast between red and green, and the many gates and seals built by the Cetra. However, the nature and tolerance of the livestream has even been questioned through characters like Chadley, who openly asks whether the livestream would accept him.
When I die, will I return to the livestream too? Given what I am?
Well, yeah. Why wouldn't you?
Oh.
And if Chadley is invited, why not the Gi? Could the Cetra finally accept the Gi? Could vegan burgers be back on the menu? The key to ending this conflict: a child, the Son of Seto, ready to fulfill his father's legacy and make a big impact on the world of FF7.
I'll make you proud, Dad. Just wait.
And let's just ignore the fact that there's a convenient elevator that can bypass all of those gates. Thanks, Bugenhagen. But this is just the tip of the iceberg of the 30-year cook, a plan that has been in motion for longer than some people realize.
Tonight, I am proud to announce that by popular demand, we have a very special treat for everyone.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky.
Let us go back to the E3 2015 reveal trailer. While it has not been officially confirmed who voiced the trailer, many suggesting voice actor David Lodge, the voice is also very similar to Bruce Thomas as Gi Nattak in Rebirth.
My name is Gi Nattak.
Because of this, regardless of who the VA is, some speculate that it is actually the character of Gi Nattak speaking in Remake's reveal trailer. Now, keep in mind what I've just explained about how the Gi's world ended, and listen to the trailer again.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky. The memory of the star that threatened all burns eternal in our hearts.
While the foreboding sky works well as a description of Meteor, and it has been long ago since OG came out, this also works as a reference to the star which ended the Gi's homeworld. If we look at the Japanese script, which can be directly translated to "the bright star that would engulf everything will always be remembered," we can also see our new favorite word, Hoshi, meaning that the sentence works just as well when referring to a meteor as it does to a planet. Now imagine Gi Nattak just met with our party, who promised to return the black materia.
I trust you will return our materia to its rightful home. Only you can end our torment.
And now listen to the trailer and see if this lines up.
For they are coming back. At last, the promise has been made.
You might think this has to be a stretch. Splice two similar sentences together and you'll have a connection. However, listen carefully to what the Gi warriors tell Nattak at the end of his side quest in Cosmo Canyon.
Finally. At long last. At last. And thus, the promise has been made. The promise has been made. See that it is not broken, Son of Seto.
This to me proves that Rebirth is intentionally reframing the 2015 reveal trailer. The developers are aware that there's double meaning to those words, and they know we've been obsessing about it. Maybe this was their plan all along. After all, keep in mind that they've added this connection in Rebirth before we even knew the voice of Gi Nattak and could speculate on the topic. I believe that in 2015, the promise was not made just to the fans of FF7, but to the Gi tribe, which has been waiting for salvation for much longer than 30 years. Director Hamaguchi recently reiterated what Tetsuya Nomura stated before the release of Rebirth, that the structure of the whole story was in place from the very beginning, that the ending was mapped out from the start. Because it's obvious now that the developers love puzzles, whatever we hear in the Revelation reveal probably has a double connection to the story as well.
But our planet answered, awakening mighty weapons to stand against this celestial threat.
Perhaps this is Gi Nattak speaking from a perspective of being accepted by the planet. Or it's Nanaki's actual adult voice, since we only know his fake old man voice. The devs certainly knew the core pieces of the new mysteries, so they were able to use them to create the puzzle pieces in front of us. Even if it's just a clever retcon, at the very least, Rebirth consciously plays with this concept in Nanaki's side quest. You have to ask yourself, why would they make the remake reveal trailer mention these specific things, if not to tie them to the story, and as hidden proof that the plan for Revelation has been in motion already. There are multiple possible interpretations, of course, but there are also many other ways they could have phrased that FF7 Remake is coming. Why phrase it this way? Having double meaning in stories can actually be very powerful. It's a great tool for introducing misdirection in mythologies, while leaving some breadcrumbs that point at the truth. Loveless in Rebirth is a great example of how to do that, since it also can be interpreted in multiple ways, but likely has direct ties to what's really going on. It gives us something to chew on while we eagerly await the last game. This detective work has been set up for us from the very beginning, and it's this bold approach to storytelling, reminiscent of the mythology of television shows like The X-Files, Lost, or Mr. Robot, that eventually got me hooked on this trilogy. The urge to solve the puzzle is very addictive and connects many other obsessive fans all over the world. It's been fun enough that even if the puzzle is unsolvable in the end, I don't think I will mind because the journey is worth it. Being a part of this community was an amazing ride that I will always cherish. However, this is the 30-year cook, so I need to talk about the OG and compilation. If you've made it this far but you're trying to avoid spoilers, like things from OG that we might see in Revelation, this is your warning. Check out the rest of the video next year to see how right I was. For the rest of you, grab that 30-year-old snowboard and let's mosey because we have to talk about Loveless G Edition again. The livestream itself was always one of the protagonists of the story, not simply as a river of energy and memories, but as a collective being, able to protect the planet from Meteor and OG, something that has a will of its own and can fight external threats, but itself can be influenced from within. And in Rebirth, the livestream is angry. We know from On the Way to a Smile that Sephiroth was able to exploit people's fear and despair on the planetary scale through Geostigma, and that the effects were similar to those seen in Jenova-infused soldiers. What if a similar principle applies to other negative feelings like anger? If Jenova was feeding off the anger of the Cetra, it could explain why they went practically extinct. When we visit the temple, we can see that they were clearly very powerful, yet they seem to struggle with Jenova a lot more than our party does. So perhaps our party is getting something right that the Cetra didn't understand. It's also possible that Jenova was the one to finally influence the Gi to create the black materia, destroy the planet, perhaps so it can hitch a ride to other planets, which could explain the Jenova-like figures in the Gi's village. I initially dismissed some of the theories around the Gi summoning Jenova because after all it's the black materia that summons the destroyer of worlds capable of destroying the planet, and this is also why it was stolen from the Gi in the first place, so they couldn't use it. However, why did Jenova crash on Gaia? Is it just a cosmic coincidence? Or perhaps if it can exploit negativity, maybe it was drawn to Gaia due to the negative feelings held by the Gi, or even by the Cetra. Perhaps Jenova is lured by angry livestreams. Maybe it's not something that needs an explanation, but how does Jenova avoid landing on empty planets, for example? Maybe it's not that random after all. In the mural chamber at the Temple of the Ancients, the story is told in distinct parts. That there was a conflict between humans and the Cetra, and that the Discord may have been seeded by Jenova. That something fell from the sky and wounded the planet, and that humans and Cetrans fought Jenova once they understood its power of mimicry, but not before Jenova has sown even more conflict. However, if you listen to how the story is presented, it's actually very one-sided, painting the Cetra as the good guys, which we know is not completely true. This ambiguous part about Jenova's influence on the conflict, that perhaps their enmity was seeded by our celestial adversary, no one can say, is interesting because the Cetra do confirm later that Jenova was causing the conflict. However, at the beginning, its effects were uncertain, which suggests to me that there was discord long before Jenova was a problem, and that the Cetra are not fully understanding their part in this conflict. They're not seeing their culpability in having drawn Jenova to the planet, if that's the case, and don't understand how Jenova has been exploiting their own weaknesses. Right before the presentation moves on to the Gi, we briefly see Jenova take the shape of an angel, very reminiscent of the goddess from Loveless, who also comes down from the sky just like Jenova did. So the symbolism here points strongly towards the goddess representing Jenova. This is a strange connection, however, if we look at this scene before, we see people dancing with backs turned against each other, some crawling on the floor. The choreography doesn't suggest harmony or peace. Afterwards, the goddess descends from the sky. So, in my view, Loveless may be pointing at a cause and effect here. In response to the goddess arriving, we then see an escalation. The heroes fight each other to claim her boon. This part is stated more explicitly in the lyrics, and feels like a definite parallel to Jenova's ability to cause conflict. The hero later dances in lockstep with the goddess. In the choreography, the way the hero holds and raises her is kind of reminiscent of another hero who's been swayed by Jenova back in Nibelheim. I mean, it could just be a dance, but why is the hero so taken by the goddess?
Hey, Elmira.
Yes?
What happened to this place?
The world's ending. At least, that's what everyone's saying.
The opposite of these negative feelings empowering Jenova are positive ones. In On the Way to a Smile, it's confirmed that people who have greater will to live are more resistant to geostigma, and if the livestream can turn black, perhaps this is a precedent for more positive change, like a more accepting livestream. This itself ties back to the OG. The Ultimania Omega outlines how the planet's energy can become stronger when following the natural cycle of life, essentially explaining its purpose. People grow, their knowledge increases, then death. They return to the planet grows, and the planet is qualitatively improved. Then birth. The planet gives birth to new life forms. The planet gives birth to an evolved form of life. Then the cycle repeats. With this in mind, Could the Gi not fit into this picture? In OG, the main explanation for the Gi persisting is that they were vengeful spirits. Perhaps them being outsiders is more of a misdirection added in Rebirth, and that the solution to their torment is actually in line with the logic that always existed in OG. If they accept their culpability and let go of hatred, and the Cetra understand that they need to let go of their fear and accept the Gi into the livestream, the planet would be improved in line with how the cycle of life was always meant to work. Is it really a deal breaker that the Gi are not off this planet? Of course, this mechanism is also why the Cetra were fearful in the first place, because the Gi spirits, in their current form, do endanger the livestream. Anyone with a strong enough will to manifest an actual black materia could cause real damage inside the livestream, just as Sephiroth is doing now. If we are all reuniting in the Promised Land at the end of the world, maybe the Cetra don't want the Gi to be a part of that. This again ties the Gi to another core concept expanded in the Remake trilogy, the Promised Land. If we look at the cycle of life on its own, the picture seems incomplete. To what end does this cycle continue? If the livestream as a whole is alive, I think it makes sense that it has an end of its own. Just like all of life as we know it, humans also get stronger throughout their life, but have to die eventually, so there's a bit of poetic symmetry to this. That's why I believe the Promised Land is represented in Loveless. The play contains several moments that have direct ties to important elements of Rebirth's story, like Cloud and Aerith teaming up against Sephiroth, and once this battle is over, they separate, which in chapter 13 is shown with an Advent Children coded scene of Aerith returning to the livestream. However, this dialogue by Alfred really stands out as something we haven't really seen yet.
You needn't promise that you'll wait, for I know that I will find you here.
Because it's something that alludes to something Cloud says in the final cutscene of OG. This combined with the symbolic end of the world makes me think that Remake wants to elaborate on why the cycle of life is fair, and why death is just a small but necessary part in the grand beautiful structure that makes up life in the universe. Those who die are not really gone, and we will get to see them again after our own death. We know we will find them, and the promise is not necessary if this is a natural process. This also gives Aerith and all of the Cetra stakes in fighting for this world from within the livestream, because at some point it will all culminate in a place that is shaped by all the souls that have ever been accepted into the livestream.
All these moments and memories, precious and fleeting, they're like rain rolling off his back.
The precious memories that Aerith is talking about at the end of Remake and that Sephiroth is trying to influence are key to the planet's endgame, because the contents of the livestream effectively dictate what the afterlife is like. Memories shape new generations, but also shape the experience of the dead, who, in the form of whispers, are coming back to prevent Sephiroth from remaking the afterlife. The reunion of worlds that's been mentioned in the game is an essential part of all of the livestream coming together and forming the Promised Land. While it's usually brought up in the context of Sephiroth's plans, I think that's a bit of a misdirection, and that it is actually a natural process that Sephiroth is trying to exploit. The reunion of worlds under normal conditions is a good thing. Once everyone has reunited and is ready to move on, the world, the livestream, has to end, and it will be time for another world, new characters, new stories to take place. For the cycle of life to be truly complete, the world has to end. At the edge of creation, Cloud bears the burden of the universe of creation, because the planet itself is part of a cycle that enables new planets to exist. He is defending the planet's cycle. Perhaps the universe of creation is the beginning of a new planet being formed. Sephiroth bears the burden of the universe of death, which the developers were keen to point out in the remake Materia Ultimania, that it is shaped like his wing, very reminiscent of the final form of Sephiroth we fight as a party in OG. In essence, what Sephiroth is looking at is his defeated self from the original game. He is practically looking at his dead body. His wish to defy destiny means that he wants to change this outcome, prevent the planet's cycle, and take control over the Promised Land. Sephiroth wants to create a universe of infinity where his story will continue. Now, let me give you my extra spicy revelation theory. In order to do that, he has found a way to go into a mirrored version of the original FF7 world. One which is similar but reversed in some ways, because Remake is like a mirror image of OG, but it's an imperfect reflection. That's kind of the same, but some things are flipped. A world that's heading for the same fate and destiny because it is held hostage by Jenova's will. Except this time, Sephiroth, with the knowledge of the original game, will make sure that he wins. The planet will be destroyed, that's still the goal, but Sephiroth will not end. This is what Cloud has to prevent. For that, Cloud needs to allow the planet to die a natural death, and allow the natural Promised Land to take place. A big ask for someone who's not known for embracing acceptance at this point. And here comes the most paradoxical part of this decision, because we've spent all this time worrying about Meteor and preventing the destruction of the world. However, once those 7 seconds till the end pass, Cloud will have to let go and actually let the world end, because it's the only way that Sephiroth can be fully defeated. Once he does this, because the world ends, Cloud will enter the Promised Land, where Aerith is already, and she will help him return to reality so that he can live out the rest of his life naturally. This will be possible because the Promised Land sits outside the boundary of time, which is something I will explain in the next section. If this all feels familiar to the end of Rebirth, it's because the final chapter of Rebirth has already depicted parts of this process. The fact that Cloud and Aerith are quote, homeward bound, and that we fought at the edge of creation. This is why the name of the final chapter is End of the World. It has already begun. However, for this good version of the Promised Land to be possible, the Cetra also need to understand that it's not a great philosophy to align oneself with anger and resentment, like they have clearly done in the past, that they bear some responsibility for their downfall by letting Jenova, the source of everything, exploit their mistakes. And this is another thread of the story hinted at the end of Loveless.
Will the goddess grant you her blessing? Or will the flames of vengeance consume you?
It applies not just to Cloud or the Cetra, but to everyone in the story, who may be twisted by anger and resentment, making them vulnerable to Jenova's manipulation. As for Sephiroth, could he change too? Personally, I don't see why. I do think we may understand his motives better, but I don't see a type of redemption arc that would make him less of a villain. While I see potential in the Gi because of their ability to put their trust in Nanaki, Sephiroth seems pretty set on his plans. However, the similarities and differences between Sephiroth and the Gi are fascinating, like the fact that they both want to use the black materia but are effectively counting on two different outcomes. The Gi wanting to end their existence and Sephiroth wants infinite existence. So the Gi are not just a clever explanation for the black materia, but have very deep ties to different concepts and themes that the Remake trilogy is expanding. Oh, we are not done with Loveless just yet. Yes, it's a rabbit hole with multiple interpretations, but I think it's worth considering what it may allude to. There are enough connections to be confident that it's used as a tool to reinforce important elements of the story. Even if you're not a hardcore theory crafter, these elements prime players to think about certain concepts. The connections are really quite prominent throughout the game, so I find it hard to believe that they are not intentional.
Oh, this weird thing, dude. This weird symbolism shit. In a game where they very intentionally show you weird stuff, this pops up out of nowhere and it's like, what is happening?
The symbolism cannot be too obvious, otherwise we'd just have all the answers already and nothing to talk about. So let's dive in one last time. The Loveless Place starts with different elements and gears coming together to form a clock. I interpret this as the creation of a new world and the beginning of time. This is to highlight that the play encompasses a complete cycle of a single planet, one that has a beginning and an end when time stops, as we've discussed before. Later in the play, Cait Sith introduces the city of Guardia, which represents the planet, and alludes to its mechanical nature. What's interesting is this line.
An insatiable machine devoid of pity. Neighbours on all sides fell victim to its hunger, while it grew larger and ever more powerful.
This can be connected to multiple concepts, for example, the reunion of worlds, about which Sephiroth says, feeds the planet. But another interpretation is that the planet can subsume other worlds, as it did with the Gi's homeworld, which we could also see as a neighbor that fell victim to the planet's hunger. Then we get the main playable acts featuring Alfred the Traveler, who is freed by Rosa. We're presented with various choices and elements from the game. I won't go too deep into these specific elements, because those have way too many possible interpretations. However, the fact that the FF7 story is repeated in Loveless this way is symbolic in itself, because it shows that everything that is happening in Rebirth's story now has already happened before in some form, and will likely happen again and again. There are cycles that keep repeating, and there are those who are trying to break those cycles. Each cycle or planet has a story that's unique, yet there will always be fundamental rules that don't change. We will always be presented with choices but don't fully control the outcomes. We can't always redeem evil or stop death, and eventually the world has to end. Yet we have to confront our fate either way. Finally, when the world ends, time also ends. And time is important in Rebirth's story, because it's something that's reserved for those who are alive. If you look at Zack's world, there's a distinct lack of time, or at least a normal flow of it.
How long ago was that again? Weird. My internal clock's busted.
Yeah, mine too. What's that about anyway?
The game wants you to contemplate this concept, which is why it's reoccurring so much. But Zack's world is a topic for another time. The way I understand the Promised Land is that it sits outside of the normal boundaries of time. So once we reunite there, everyone will have a chance to see each other again and move on. It will last as long as it needs to. We won't have to wait or hurry. Everyone will just be there.
We're all headed for the same place. You'll see your daddy and Tifa again.
Soon?
Soon enough, Marlene. Soon enough.
Not being limited by time is likely what attracted Sephiroth to this construct. All these elements around time, fate, death are drip-feeded through Loveless, the Gi, and even NPCs because, as I've mentioned earlier, I believe the game is trying to make a point. However, instead of stating it outright, it wants you to slowly reach the same conclusion on your own. After reading many YouTube comments from FF7 fans, I was surprised to find out just how many people genuinely believe that Aerith should not suffer the same fate as she did in the original game, and that this must be the true meaning of defying fate in the re-trilogy. I can empathize with that wish, since the devs have played up this unknown future and uncertainty regarding Aerith's fate. As much as I adore Aerith's character, I don't believe the developers would change the story in such way. However, as a game that repeats the story, but with a strong emphasis on defying fate, I think the re-trilogy needs to work harder at making the case as to why Aerith's death couldn't be avoided. The most powerful way of making this point is to present evidence and ideas for players to reach this understanding themselves. So by the time the point is stated directly, we are already prepared to accept the truth.
This isn't about me, though. It's about saving the world. And you.
The revelation doesn't come out of nowhere. When it arrives, all the puzzle pieces suddenly fall into place. That's the FF7 way. Time is also relevant in the case of the Gi, who might hold all sorts of hints as to how reality works in FF7. For example, after we leave the Gi village, the entrance we took earlier is sealed, almost as if it was suddenly filled with rock. But what if this is an illusion? Let's look back at how the Gi manifested themselves to begin with. Nanaki had to find a relic that is tied to the Gi's past, and then the first warrior appeared. Later, they tend to appear as if out of nowhere. This makes me suspect that the Gi's realm may be separate from the Livestream's realm, and that's what the Cetra are keeping at bay. So the rock was always there, we just briefly connected with the Gi's realm until the Cetra severed this connection. And this is why it appears to us as if the party was teleported back to the caves and the time of day has changed. The Rebirth material Ultimania holds an interesting note regarding concept art for the crossing to the Gi village. This piece depicts the discord between the Livestream and the Gi anima, who cannot return to their own planet. The abstract forms show the world that exists between the afterlife and reality. Based on the initial concepts, it seems that the Gi's realm was meant to feel a lot more separate than how it is presented in the game, which would make teleporting back to reality make a lot more sense, so I reckon this visual was scaled down during development. However, the quote mentioning that it exists between the afterlife and reality takes on a more profound meaning when we consider that this is the space where Aerith briefly connects with Zack. It does make me wonder, if the Gi's realm is separate, what could that entail? We don't really know how the Gi perceive time. If they're not bound to the planet, they might not be experiencing time in the same way as those on the planet. Is it possible that in OG and Rebirth we visited the same Gi realm, and that the same Gi Nattak has basically met our party twice? It would certainly give new meaning to him saying,
"For they are coming back."
I know, it's a crazy cook, but imagine him admitting this in Revelation. It would explain why he was so trusting, almost as if he knew our party already. There are still many questions that remain. Even if we knew the Gi's ultimate fate, would that help us crack the mystery of what the Terrier world really is? I want to explore these ideas in future videos, but let me know in the comments if you have a different idea for how the Gi's story should end. What I do believe is that if the Gi's planet came before Gaia, we're not dealing with a looped universe, and the FF7 world won't repeat indefinitely. The ultimate fate of the planet is at stake, and the FF7 world must come to an end. In order to save it, we must let it end. And after that, a new world will begin. Perhaps one with a new livestream. Perhaps a world we know already. Another Final Fantasy maybe. One that seems to have a lot of similarities to FF7. What do you think it is? Come on, do I have to spell it out? What really comes after 7? I think it could be Final Fantasy.
Of course, this is only the most recent.
All right! To sector7waterfilters.com and get your filter fitted today.
Will the Cetra make peace with the Gi? Will Nanaki help them? How did the Gi survive their own edge of creation? Or did Bugenhagen also cover up an alien spacecraft that they've arrived in? I hope for these questions we do get definitive answers in Revelation, although perhaps some mysteries should stay open to interpretation, as they were in the original game. As for me, I will never stop searching for the truth. Well, it was worth a try. But we cannot do this alone. Even when crafting theories or sharing our hopes for the story, it's something best done together. Sometimes we need a little help. What?
Not bad, kid.